Atomic Habits, Chapter 7, The Secret to Self-Control. The chapter starts off by talking about the Vietnam War and how around 23% of the soldiers in Vietnam were addicted to heroin. And there was a task force created of researchers to basically track down all of the veterans when they come back and make sure that they are put in rehabilitation of some sort. And there was a researcher, his name was Lee Robbins, that was conducting a research on the the frequent heroin users and their behavior when they came back to the U.S. And what he found is that most of the heroin users, when they returned home, were not addicted anymore. And in fact, only 5% became re-addicted within a year, and only 12% relapsed within 3 years. And this is something that is very surprising because, at least at that time, it was very surprising because it was believed that heroin addiction is it will last forever. It's lifelong, and it can't be uh, taken care of so easily. And what Robbins suggested was that addictions could spontaneously disappear if there was a radical change in the environment that the individual was put in. So there was a passage in the chapter, and I'll go ahead and read it. In Vietnam, soldiers spent all day surrounded by queues, triggering heroin use. It was easy to access. They were engulfed by the constant stress of war. They built friendships with fellow soldiers who were also heroin users, and they were thousands of miles from home. Once a soldier returned to the United States, though, he found himself in an environment devoid of these triggers. When the context changed, so did the habit. Compare this situation to that of a typical drug user. Someone becomes addicted at home or with friends, goes to a clinic to get clean, which is devoid of all the environmental stimuli that prompt their habit, then returns to their old neighborhood with all of their previous cues that caused them to get addicted in the first place. It's no wonder that usually you see numbers that are the exact opposite of those in the Vietnam study. Typically 90% of heroin users become re-addicted once they return home from rehab. Um, and James Clear in this chapter begins to exclaim that discipline and self-control is not the the key factor in changing bad habits. It's the environment. People who have self-control, he suggested, use it the least because they shape their environment in such a way that there are no temptations that would test their willpower. And it is basically, with that sense, it is impossible to stick to positive habits in a negative environment. The only way that you could stick to positive habits is to eliminate uh, the cues at the source. So eliminate the bad habits at the source, which are the cues that trigger that habit. And some of the examples that James Clear gave is if you can't seem to get any work done, leave your phone in another room for a few hours. If you're continually feeling like you're not enough, stop following social media accounts that trigger jealousy and envy. If you're wasting too much time watching television, move the TV out of the bedroom. If you're spending too much money on electronics, quit reading reviews of the latest tech gear. If you're playing too many video games, unplug the console and put it in a closet after you choose. And these are some of the things that I actually uh, included as part of my life. So this was, I don't know if it's because of this book or if I just did it on my own, but like playing too many video games, if you actually put the console, or like for in my case, it was a PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 actually. So I had both of them, and I was addicted. And the only way I would stop playing games is if I just completely unplugged the system and put it somewhere I couldn't reach it, or reach it but not be willing enough to take it out and then plug it back in. And it worked wonders, honestly. I, I, I haven't touched it in like a year now, I would say. Um, or maybe it's like a year and a half. It's been a long time, and it it just goes to show that the the way to eliminate a bad habit is to make it invisible. Make it so that you won't even be enticed to pursue that bad habit. And we briefly talked about this in the last chapter. I discussed drinking soda. If you want to stop drinking soda, don't have it at home. If you want to stop eating sweet, sugary treats, don't have them at home. It sounds simple, but so many people are get conflicted. Like, let's say you go grocery shopping and just out of instinct, you'll pick up the sweet snacks that you usually pick up when you go grocery shopping. So how do you avoid it? You go to a different grocery store entirely. It's a brand new environment. That environment has no cues for you. Everything is brand new to you, and it will you'll notice that you won't even be tempted to pick up the snacks that you normally do if you really put it out of your mind, because it's a brand new environment and your brain hasn't encoded any habits to it yet. And that's another thing that James Clear talked about in this chapter is if you form a habit, it will last forever. It's hard coded into your brain basically, and that habit is hard coded into your brain in such a way that it requires a context, and the context is the environment. So he gave an example of this woman who enjoyed horse riding, and she also enjoyed smoking cigarettes. And over time, she quit smoking cigarettes. She also stopped horse riding. And after a few years, she gave horse riding another try. And what she found is that she had a sudden temptation to smoke a cigarette. It's not that uh, it just happened suddenly. It's all with the context. She, when she smoked before, she smoked after riding a horse. And now, after all these years, she rides a horse and she suddenly has the urge to smoke a cigarette. It's no coincidence. It's a habit hard coded into her brain that she doesn't even realize it. Another example James gave was uh, addicts of cocaine, people who abuse cocaine, were shown uh, many pictures on a screen, and one of those pictures was that of cocaine, but they were only shown the picture for like 300 milliseconds, like a very small amount, where your eyes couldn't even register it, um, or your eyes to your brain consciously couldn't register it. But what was interesting is that after seeing the pictures, they had a temptation or a craving for doing cocaine. It wasn't because they saw cocaine on the screen, it was too fast. They couldn't have caught it. But subconsciously, the 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 brain had the urge just by looking at it for a microsecond, basically, which is pretty wild to see that how our unconscious mind is basically a whole different personality that works on its own mechanics compared to our conscious mind. So it's some pretty interesting stuff, and it's it just goes to show that it really is impossible to break bad habits if you're unwilling to change the environment that those habits exist in. You basically need a complete overhaul of some sort to erase that habit from your lifestyle. Uh, and not only the habit, you're also erasing the environment in some way or shape or form. So as a In the last paragraph of the chapter, James said that self-control, is a short-term solution. Temptations will eventually become too strong to resist. So eliminate the problem at the root by taking it out of your environment entirely. And that's, I think, it's the best way, because you're fighting a losing battle by relying on your self-control and your willpower to not do something. If there is a um, let's say a chocolate cake in your fridge, you may look at it the first day and go, no, I'm not gonna eat it. I'm avoiding sugar and I will not eat this. You look at it tomorrow, you may say the same thing. 3 days, 4 days, you're gonna keep on fighting the temptation, but there will be one day where you just don't have the energy to fight any sort of temptation. And you're already having a bad day, you're under a lot of stress, so you convince yourself that it's okay to eat that chocolate cake. You just lost to your temptation. And that's not anything that's wrong with you. It's something that's wrong with the environment. You shouldn't have to force yourself to live in an environment that's filled with bad cues that trigger bad habits. And the people who have the most self-control don't have to use it at all. That's why they have the most self-control. It In the chapter it discusses how people who are defined as having more self-control are not categorically much different from the average person. It's really a matter of their environment. So, going to the title, the secret to self-control is having a good environment that promotes good habits, that promotes self-control, that promotes self-discipline. So it was a pretty short chapter, and this is the last chapter for the first law, which is make it obvious. And starting from chapter 8, we'll be looking at the second law, which is make it attractive. Now, you've learned a few things to make a, a new habit obvious and easy to pick up. And now the next will be, okay, it's obvious. How do you make it attractive? How do you actually make yourself willing to do that new positive habit, or the inverse, break a negative habit? So I'll just go and read through the chapter summary and we can end it off there. So, chapter summary: the inversion of the first law of behavior change is make it invisible. Once a habit is formed, it is unlikely to be forgotten. People with high self-control tend to spend less time in tempting situations. It's easier to avoid temptation than resist it. One of the most practical ways to eliminate a bad habit is to reduce exposure to the cue that causes it. Self-control is a short-term strategy, not a long-term one. And down here, James Clear provides a summary of the earlier chapters that covered the first law and make it obvious. So 1.1, fill out the habits scorecard. Write down your current habits to become aware of them. 1.2, use implementation intentions, which is I will do certain behavior at a certain time in a certain location. 1.2 also discussed habit stacking, which was you start with the implementation intention, and then the following habits that you want to perform will be, after I perform a certain behavior, I will perform this new behavior. So after I perform my current habit, I will perform the new habit. And chapter 1.3 expanded on that idea. And finally, chapter 1.4, design your environment, make the cues of good habits obvious and visible. I'm realizing now that these are not chapters, these are just the points completely separate from the chapters. It's just summarizing everything into its own list. So that was the first law, make it obvious, and how to in the section of how to create a good habit. Now for how to break a bad habit. Reduce exposure. Remove the cues of your bad habits from your environment. So again, just to kind of nail this point down. Discipline is not the answer, nor is self-control. Nobody necessarily has uh, the pristine amount of discipline or self-control to fight temptations. It's really the environment. Set your environment in such a way where you don't have to use discipline or self-control at all. And that's when you truly succeed, because now you're putting your brain power towards more important matters than fighting yourself to do something. When you fight yourself, you're hurting yourself. The whole point of setting up your environment in such a way is that you can think more creatively because your brain power is not spent fighting temptations. I'm going to close it off here. Again, very short chapter, but I really enjoyed reading this one. This is one of the best chapters so far. So I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, take care and have a nice day.